how quickly could you have made it from, say, the back kitchen sliding glass door out through the backyard and through sort of those woods and the trail up to Wallenda Road where you were just driving?
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. How did the Idaho quadruple murderer exit the house? What route did he take? What was the killer's escape route? And obviously we mean first by foot, then by vehicle, but particularly by vehicle. We've examined in detail how the killer may have gotten in and his movements inside 1122 King Road. But what about his escape route out? A few hours ago, the industrious Brian Enton from News Nation was on the ground, but this time at the back of 1122 King Road. Ashley Banfield thinks the killer exited from the back, from the kitchen sliding glass door, then went up through the wooded embankment, which is obviously concealed, through the parking lot out back, and then down to Wallenda Drive. Enton estimated this might take a minute or less going that route. Now, I was hoping when Brian was standing in the snow with the crime scene tape behind him that he would direct the camera from that vantage point, zoom in from the point of that upper level parking lot, and then look down the slope to the sliding door, because those images would have shown a lot more clarity exactly what that would have looked like, because so far what you've seen has been kind of obscured by the woods. That embankment is super dark even in the middle of the day, have you guys noticed? And although we've looked at this house so many times from so many angles, one thing that's remarkable with this house is just how exposed it is. It's on a hill, but it stands alone and it's sort of surrounded from many sides by gravel or ground. There's sort of no flowers, no lawn. The house just stands sort of naked and exposed on that hillside. Just one side has that sort of wooded texture, but especially from the elevation where the big balcony is and that sort of kitchen porch, the second and first and second floor essentially. It is amazing how far one has line of sight right inside the house from multiple vantage points. I mean, look at this one. Now, of all the views of the house and surroundings, this one I think is probably the best. It gives you a sense of the forest in the background, the apartments to the left, the little parking area for the house at the bottom of your picture, and then how you could move around either from the kitchen area under the balcony to back to the sort of parking lot to the front door, or vice versa, arriving at the front door and then sort of skirting around the side. Just gives one quite a good sense of where one might want to park. And look at those vehicles parked on the road alongside. The problem with parking there is it's quite visible to the apartments to the left-hand side. Now, testing Banfield's theory, the killer would have hoofed it on foot to Wallenda Drive, and then the question is, would he have left on the same route he came, or via a different route? In terms of coming by car, would he have returned the way that he came, or gone through a different route? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you to the hundreds of you who have subscribed over the last few days. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the True Crime Rocket Science community. If you really enjoy this community, there's plenty more analysis and discussion on Patreon. It's only $2 a month, so check it out. And let's get started. So as soon as we ask this question, would he have left on the same route he came? This is in terms of driving. Or would he have gone a different route? This is where things get interesting. If the killer departed in a different direction, he would have gotten caught up immediately in the snakes and ladder labyrinth of the suburban fabric just south of King Road. Dead ends abound in this area as well, including if one simply follows the curve of Wallenda Drive to where it terminates along a long, lazy bend. Brian Enton actually mentions this, that if he didn't take that sharp turn, well, the road dead ends there. So if the killer did elect to drive along Walenta, he would have had to take a sharp left onto Ridge Road, that's here, and then continue down this way. Doesn't this suggest that the killer knew this area quite well, that he perhaps wasn't from out of town? Suppose you could say he was using GPS to navigate as well. That's also possible. It may be that law enforcement have asked for tips and footage specifically in this square area to the south because they believe in Banfield's theory that the killer exited via a different route in terms of driving. And maybe they have intel to show the beginnings of that exit driver's route. Or they've got confirmation that the way that the white car approached isn't the way it returned. In other words, if it passed Linda Lane on the way there, perhaps it didn't return that way, didn't pass the Linda Lane camera on the way back. So if that's the case, where else could you look except to the suburban fabric to the south? Also, if it parked where Banfield and Enton are suggesting, well, there is a ring camera up there, and that camera didn't have to see the vehicle, just its lights.
There is a ring camera up there at one of the houses. I went and tried to find out if it was new or old. The owner didn't want to talk about it, but there are some ring cameras up there. So
did that ring camera get a really good look at this vehicle, good enough to tell that it was a Hyundai Elantra, good enough to tell that it was white, good enough to tell even the model number, the model year of this vehicle? Now, the problem with doing a quick on-the-fly analysis with the clock ticking towards a deadline, if you're sort of on live TV or whatever, is that they can't carefully interrogate this idea, this hypothesis. They can't sort of poke it with a few critical thoughts, but we can. So the first issue with either a vehicle parking at the level above or a minute's walk down to Walenta Drive are the tire marks in front of the house. We've got to look at what is anchored possibly in evidence and say, well, does that match this theory? Is that evidence material or meaningless? So it could actually mean that the tire mark evidence is meaningless. Is it? It was investigated less than a week after the incident, and with the cops knowing they were looking for a white Hyundai, right, at the time. The other issue is that the front door was left wide open, not the sliding door. If the killer was confronted by Ethan or Xana, or someone screamed and he beat a hasty retreat from the nearest exit, which would have been the kitchen door, we'd expect to see two things. That door left open, unless the housemates closed it, that's the sliding door, and a blood trail coming out of it. But we don't see that. Bear in mind the tire marks that we're talking about are from the front of the house. So that appears to suggest where the vehicle is that law enforcement are looking for. Also, the sliding door exit is arguably more exposed in terms of line of sight than the front door. So while I was doing this analysis, I was trying to make a couple of points. And as so often happens in true crime, when you slow down, you really pay attention to what you're dealing with. You sort of notice things that you hadn't really noticed before. Your perspective shifts. And so, although in a way, at sort of first glance, the sliding door looks like a better place to beat a hasty exit, I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, look how far away that sliding door platform is visible. You can virtually see it from down the road and around the corner. The front door, kind of counterintuitively, is also exposed, but as relative cover. Guess what? In terms of the four vehicles already parked right in front of it, including Kaylee's big SUV, the Range Rover, which is providing cover from people perhaps looking in from the apartment next door, from the left. If the killer entered and left in plain sight, meaning entered the front door, perhaps he was playing the card of plausible deniability. Guess what? I'm coming and going from the house just like dozens, hundreds have done before me. I'm just entering the door like lots of other people have done. If he was counting on not being noticed, it looks like he succeeded. There's something else I've been meaning to draw your attention to, and I really only noticed this when I used the Google Street View and actually ran along the roads from the highway to King Road. There is a lot of relief. The roads rise and dip, curve and swing. There's a lot of up and down. So in terms of driving, line of sight is very limited. There are very few long, straight, flat roads, similar to Praia da Luz in Portugal, where Madeleine McCann disappeared, and that was on foot. So I'm not convinced there was a vehicle parked out back behind the house or even further down, which actually risked being seen by a lot more through traffic than in a cul-de-sac. And that then raises another issue. Would the killer really want to park in a cul-de-sac, sort of trap himself, risk getting himself trapped by not having an easy way out if confronted, right? Wouldn't he prefer an unfettered getaway route? You would think so. But then think about an intruder entering a house with 6 people inside and going anywhere, whether upstairs or downstairs. Whenever he does that, he's potentially getting himself into a cul-de-sac type situation inside the house. So this guy's either very brazen and very brave or very stupid. I think the same can be said for the Delphi killer. He was clever in the sense of finding an isolated spot, but then he had to get back to his vehicle in wet, muddied and bloodied clothes. And that's something that this killer is faced with as well, which rendered the invisibility of the isolated crime scene moot. I mean, he was actually seen returning from the crime scene to his vehicle. This is the Delphi killer. Despite all his efforts at subterfuge, dumb criminal, but sometimes a daft crime can outwit an investigation because its dumbness is unexpected. In that vein, have Ali considered that the suspect may have used a bicycle? Some of the closest campus-related buildings to 1122 King Road were related to physical fitness, such as the Physical Education Building. In fact, that building was in a direct line from the Idaho Water Tower, which is really nearby, to 1122 King Road, as well as the track and field complex, tennis courts, a golf course, the swim center, the College of Health and Human Sciences, and the women's volleyball courts. If our killer was quick and fast, perhaps he was a sportsman, and if he lived in that area, maybe he didn't even use a vehicle. Unless that Ring doorbell camera, and it sounds like there could have been even more than one, unless that Ring doorbell camera, one level up, did pick up something, and it's not the case of the cops maybe being on the right track with the white Hyundai, including its make, which is awfully specific, but knowing for sure they're looking for a fugitive Elantra, and more pertinently, its deadly, dangerous driver. Does that make sense? So what do I think happened here? I think he parked near the front of the house, which is quite brazen, but he's not getting himself much further into that labyrinth. And it's easy to kind of make a U-turn. It's easy to sort of get out of there. And perhaps, especially if he thought he'd botched the crime, or if he was worried one of those surviving housemates might peek out the window, perhaps that's why he left those skid marks on the way out. If he didn't pass by Linda Lane, it means when he hit Taylor Avenue, he turned left instead of right and entered the fabric law enforcement are so focused on right now. Does that make sense? So I'm not going to take it further than that. There was a lot of content I meant to cover in a live, but I see another channel has beaten me to it. So I'm going to instead deal with a separate subject, not in a live, but in an episode titled Was Sex the Motive? So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.